At 67, after 40 years of sewing from my small home in Southside Atlanta, I never imagined I'd live to hear my own daughter-in-law, Tasha, speak of my absence from my son Ethan's wedding as though it were a blessing. That Saturday, I woke before dawn, just as I had every morning since my husband Curtis passed 15 years ago. I pressed my best navy blue dress, the one I had bought for this very day after saving for 3 months, then pinned up my hair, clasped on my mother's pearl earrings, and checked the gift I'd prepared for what felt like the 100th time. It was a set of hand-embroidered sheets I'd spent 2 months stitching after long days of mending other people's clothes. Trouble began the moment I stepped out my front door. A water main had burst on Clover Lane overnight, flooding the entire avenue. Firefighters had blocked off several streets, rerouting traffic through areas I didn't know. My neighbor Delea called out from her window, "Grace, you can't get out that way. They've shut it down since 5 this morning." So, in my heels, I walked 15 blocks before finding a taxi willing to take the long way around the city. By the time I reached the First Metropolitan Baptist Church, the ceremony was over. I searched for the reception hall entrance, but in the confusion of the parking lot, I wandered toward the back garden, just in time to hear the voices of Tasha and her friends, Kendra and Candace. "Thank goodness she missed the ceremony," Tasha said. "You know how she is. Always with her sad stories, always talking about raising Ethan alone, always reminding people she doesn't have money." "It's better this way," Kendra laughed. "Mothers-in-law are like that. My mom says it's typical of older ladies with nothing better to do than meddle." Then Candace chimed in. "And can you imagine if she'd shown up in one of her old dresses? Poor thing doesn't know how to dress for an elegant event. This way's better, no mother-in-law drama." Their laughter hit me like a sharp wind. Old outfit. That dress had cost me a week's wages. Sad stories. I only ever shared my life when asked, trying to sound honest, not pitiful. Poor mother-in-law drama. For 2 years, I'd quietly helped Ethan and Tasha save for their condo, giving them what little I could until I'd handed over $8,000 in total. I steadied myself, smoothed the front of my dress, checked my lipstick in my compact, and walked through the main entrance as though nothing had happened. "Mom, thank heavens you made it," Ethan cried, running to hug me. "I thought something happened to you." "A pipe burst on my street," I said with a smile. "But I wouldn't have missed your wedding for anything." Tasha approached, smiling politely. "What a shame you missed the ceremony, Mother Peel. It was beautiful." I kissed her cheek. "The important thing is that you're married now. God bless you both." As the evening went on, I began to see what I'd refused to notice before. My sister-in-law Simone introduced me to guests, but quickly changed the subject when they asked about my life. My nephew Devin gave me a brief kiss before disappearing. My nieces Chloe and Skylar offered quick greetings before drifting off. When it was time to open the gifts, I watched carefully. The expensive presents from Tasha's friends were met with gasps and long thank yous. When Ethan opened my embroidered sheets, Tasha lifted them, murmured, "Thanks, Mother Peel," and slipped them under the table with the lesser gifts. Those sheets, 60 nights of love and labor, were dismissed like a formality. And as I sat there, I realized it wasn't just a careless moment or a cruel comment overheard in the garden. It was the truth of how they saw me. A relic from Ethan's past, an inconvenience in the bright new life he'd built. During dinner, I sat among polite strangers, distant relatives of Tasha's, while my son and his new wife laughed at the main table, surrounded by their friends. From where I sat, I could see them clearly, their faces glowing in the warm light, while mine, reflected faintly in the wine glass before me, looked like someone who had already been left behind. All around me were young professionals dressed in designer clothes, talking about things I barely understood: investments, overseas vacations, fine dining in places I couldn't even pronounce. It was as if an invisible wall separated us, a quiet, unseen barrier I hadn't noticed being built until it stood firmly between my world and theirs. When the music began, it wasn't the kind I recognized. The younger guests flooded the dance floor while the older ones stayed seated, chatting over their wine. I waited, hoping Ethan might come and ask me to dance the way he always did at family gatherings. But he never did. He was too absorbed, his hand resting on Tasha's back, laughing with their friends, lost in a rhythm that no longer included me. By 11 o'clock, When the party was at its liveliest, I knew it was time to leave. "Son," I said gently, touching his arm, "I'm heading home. I have work early tomorrow." He hugged me quickly. "Already leaving, Mom? Okay, have a good night. Thanks for coming." Tasha leaned in with a polite kiss. "Thank you for coming, Mother Piol. See you soon." But in her eyes, I saw it. Relief. Relief that I was leaving. Relief that the elegant celebration could continue without the shadow of the humble mother-in-law who didn't belong. The cab ride home was silent. For 40 long minutes, I replayed the night in my mind, the moments when my words went unanswered, the polite smiles that faded as soon as I stopped speaking, the way Simone steered conversations away from me, the indifference toward my gift, my son's distracted affection, and for the first time, I began to wonder if I had been fooling myself all along, believing I was an important part of my son's life when, in truth, I had become a duty to be managed. Back in my small apartment on the south side, I sat in my old rocking chair, the same one where I used to embroider, and let the memories come. The years of double shifts to pay for Ethan's private school, the sacrifices to keep him dressed well when he started dating Tasha, who came from an upper-middle-class family, the Sundays spent cooking elaborate meals for them, meals Tasha photographed for social media but never learned to make herself. I thought of Tasha's casual remarks that now felt different in hindsight. "Mother Piol, why don't you buy more modern clothes? Ethan can help you." "Doesn't it bother you that people know you're still working at your age? Ethan's a professional now. You should cut your hair shorter. It looks tidier on older women." Back then, I had taken them as kind advice. Now I saw what they were, attempts to reshape me, to soften the edges of my modest life so I wouldn't embarrass them. That night, when I finally removed my carefully pressed navy dress, I caught my reflection in the closet mirror. For the first time in years, I saw myself not as I felt inside, but as others must have seen me, a 67-year-old woman with graying hair, deep lines around her mouth, rough hands hardened by decades of sewing. My clothes were clean but plain, my face kind but ordinary. I was a reminder of a humble past Ethan preferred to keep quietly tucked away. Standing there at 3 a.m, something inside me gave way. Not with a bang, but a small, aching crack. It was the sound of truth settling in. My son no longer needed me as the mother who held his world together. He needed me as a distant, harmless memory, a woman to be acknowledged now and then, but not invited too close. The next morning, as I sat alone in my kitchen, sipping my coffee, I began to recall all the signs I had ignored, the visits that became shorter and rarer, the hurried conversations, with Tasha waiting in the car, the phone calls that grew briefer, distracted, the invitations that arrived later and later, as if someone had debated whether to send them at all. And then I remembered the phone call I had overheard 3 months earlier, when Ethan had stopped by, gone to use the bathroom, and his phone rang. Tasha's voice came through loud and clear, not knowing I was sitting right there in the living room. "Are you done over there? Kendra invited us to lunch, and I don't want to be late just because we're visiting." Those were the words I overheard from Tasha that day. Sharp, casual, and unforgettable. Just because we're visiting, as if coming to see one's own mother were an errand to be checked off. When Ethan came out of the bathroom, I lied, saying I'd stepped outside to water the plants. I didn't want him to feel guilty, but those words stayed with me, etched deep in memory. Over the next 2 weeks, I decided to run a quiet little experiment. I stopped calling Ethan. I stopped sending my good morning and good night texts. I didn't ask about Tasha or their plans or his work. I simply waited to see how long it would take before he noticed my silence. It took 8 days. When he finally called, it was to ask for a favor, if I could embroider his initials on some new shirts. He didn't ask how I'd been or why I hadn't called. There was no warmth, no curiosity, no, "How are you, Mom?" Just a request, practical and impersonal, like one might make to a tailor. Of course I agreed to do it. I always did. But as I stitched his initials each evening, I began to realize something needed to change. Not in a loud or vengeful way, just quietly, inside myself. I would stop giving my time, energy, and affection where it wasn't equally valued. And when I started looking closely, I saw patterns I'd ignored for years. My spotless little house, always ready for visits that rarely came. The money I saved for thoughtful gifts, while the ones I received were perfunctory and cheap. The dinners I hosted, lavish spreads for birthdays and holidays, though I was never once invited to a meal in return. The week before, I had seen photos on Facebook, a cozy family dinner at Tasha's parents' home. Ethan, smiling beside them, looking perfectly at ease. I hadn't been invited nor even told about it. When I gently asked Ethan later, he'd said it was a last-minute thing, that Tasha thought I wouldn't like the food they made. Small, polite lies to cover a deliberate exclusion. 3 weeks after the wedding, as I embroidered napkins no one had asked for, more out of habit than purpose, the phone rang. "Mother Pyol," Tasha said, her tone careful, polite. "Are you busy on Saturday? My mom wants to get to know you better, so we're having a small family lunch." "What are we cooking?" I asked instinctively, assuming I'd need to help. "Oh no, don't worry," she replied quickly. "My mom has everything organized. Just come as a guest." On Saturday, I arrived at her parents' house in Buckhead, carrying a coconut custard pie I'd spent the morning perfecting. The house was beautiful, large, tastefully decorated, with a manicured lawn and gleaming furniture that spoke of money and status. Tasha's parents, Brenda and Marcus, greeted me with the kind of politeness that feels more like distance than warmth. The conversation throughout lunch revolved around things far removed from my world: luxury vacations, new cars, fine dining, and investment opportunities. When I tried to join in, mentioning a funny story from my sewing work or a memory of raising Ethan alone, the room seemed to still for a second before the topic changed. My life, my struggles, my small triumphs, none of it fit their world. Tasha would sometimes translate my comments for them, her tone somewhere between explanatory and apologetic. My mother-in-law worked from home for years as a seamstress. Grace went through a lot when Ethan was little. Her words were always wrapped in kindness, but her voice carried an undercurrent of quiet embarrassment, as if I were a story she needed to make palatable. Later, while helping clear the table, though they insisted I didn't need to, I overheard Brenda whisper to Tasha in the kitchen. "She's a very hard-working woman, but you can tell she comes from a very different background. I just hope Ethan finds a balance between staying connected and not compromising his new social position." And Tasha, without hesitation, replied, "Yes, it's complicated, but Ethan understands he has different responsibilities now." That night, I drove home in silence, a strange mixture of hurt and clarity sitting heavy in my chest. It wasn't just in my head. There truly was a quiet, deliberate effort to reduce my place in Ethan's new life, not with cruelty, but with the soft indifference of people who had outgrown where they came from. I understood, finally, that I had become part of a past they wished to keep politely out of sight, a reminder of struggle and humility that didn't match the polished image they now projected. In the days that followed, I began to see my home differently, not as the lonely place I waited for them in, but as something sacred, mine alone. The walls were lined with family photos, the echoes of a life I had built around Ethan. Letters from his college years, filled with gratitude for my sacrifices and the promise of a better future, hung framed beside pictures of birthdays, graduations, and every moment he had once needed me completely. All of that now belonged to the past. The adult Ethan, married, successful, and comfortably established, no longer needed the woman who had struggled to get him there. It was as though my role had been fulfilled. My presence now meant only to fade quietly into the background, appearing politely when required and careful never to disturb the refined surface of his new life. The realization didn't come with tears or anger. It arrived with a cold, lucid calm that surprised even me. The defining moment came exactly 1 month after the wedding. Ethan showed up at my house one Wednesday afternoon, alone, serious-faced, looking eerily like the teenager he used to be when he had done something wrong. "We need to talk," he said, sitting in the same armchair where he'd once done his high school homework. "Tasha and I have been thinking about our future. We want to have kids soon, and we want to make sure we can give them the best possible life. That means we have to be careful with our finances, our social connections, the image we project as a family." I nodded, my hands folded in my lap. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Not yet. He hesitated, took a breath. Tasha thinks it might be better if you didn't come to certain social events, especially when her parents or people from work are there. It's not that we don't love you, but sometimes your stories about how hard things were, or about your job, or about money, they can make people uncomfortable. We don't want them to get the wrong idea about our family. He spoke gently, with the tone of someone who had rehearsed his lines many times. Awkward situations? I repeated, keeping my voice even while something cracked silently inside me. Well, it's not what you say. It's just the impression it gives. You come from a different world, Mom. And there it was. The truth I had been refusing to see. The story of sacrifice that had once defined me with pride had become, in his eyes, an embarrassment. The years of struggle, the exhaustion, the love that carried him through his childhood, had all turned into something he wanted to edit out of his new life. What exactly are you proposing? I asked quietly. That we see each other less often, he said. We can still have lunch, just us, but for bigger gatherings, it's better to keep things separate. I stayed silent for several long minutes. My son, the boy whose fevers I'd soothed with damp cloths when I couldn't afford a doctor, was now asking me to disappear from his world for the sake of appearances. That's fine, I said at last. Relief washed over his face. I understand perfectly. He stood, hugged me, and left believing the matter settled. But as I felt his arms around me, a new kind of stillness settled inside me, not sorrow, but clarity. That night, after Ethan left with a clear conscience and a lighter heart, I sat at my sewing table and began to make plans. Not for confrontation or revenge, but for renewal. For the first time in 32 years, I was going to live as Grace, not just as Ethan's mother. The week that followed was the quietest my house had ever been. No phone calls, no extra meals in case someone dropped by, no anxious cleaning before a visit that might never happen. The silence, once frightening, became liberating. I walked through each room, touching objects that carried entire chapters of my life. Every photograph, every trinket, every letter had a story. In a drawer, I found Ethan's old letters, filled with love, gratitude, and promises. Mom, when I graduate, I'll buy you a bigger house. I'll never forget how hard you worked for me. He had kept those promises, technically. He had helped when I needed it, expressed thanks, never denied my effort. But somewhere along the way, something deeper had vanished. The easy warmth, the instinctive love that required no conditions. I had not lost my son. I had simply outlived the version of myself he still wanted to keep. And that night I realized, perhaps that was not a tragedy, but an invitation to finally become visible to myself. That Wednesday, while sorting through a pile of old bills, I stumbled upon a folder of receipts, small, almost insignificant on their own. Yet together they told a story I hadn't wanted to see. Each slip of paper marked an instance of quiet generosity during Ethan's courtship and engagement. The $50 I lent them when Tasha wanted to upgrade the refrigerator, the $100 I spent on special ingredients for the test wedding cake, $30 for the engagement gift she'd chosen herself, $20 more for gas the day she insisted I accompany her to try on dresses, saying she needed an older woman's opinion. Individually, none of it seemed worth remembering. But when I added it all up, it amounted to nearly 6 months of my pension, 6 months of careful budgeting, all given without hesitation and never mentioned again. I hadn't expected repayment, but I felt foolish realizing how easily I had allowed myself to be both a source of support and an afterthought. A useful hand, but an inconvenient presence. The next morning, my oldest friend, Delea, came over as she had done every Thursday for the past 20 years. She had been there through every storm of my widowhood, the one person who truly knew the cost of every sacrifice I had made for Ethan. As I poured coffee, she studied me with concern. "What's wrong, Grace? You seem quiet." So I told her everything. The wedding, the conversation with Ethan, Tasha's subtle humiliations, the new boundaries I was expected to observe. Delea listened in silence, but the sadness in her eyes told me she understood all too well. "Oh, honey," she said finally, squeezing my hand. "I've seen this happen before. The kids move up, marry into better circles, and little by little, they erase everything that reminds them where they came from. It's not cruelty. It's shame. Her words stung, not because I thought she was wrong, but because I knew she wasn't. But Ethan's not like that, I protested softly. He's never denied our background. No, not to you, she replied. But think, when was the last time Tasha came here? The last time Ethan took you to meet his colleagues? The last time he included you without you asking first? Her questions landed like quiet blows. I realized that Tasha had only been to my home 3 times in 2 years, each visit brief and distracted. Ethan had never once invited me to a work event, though I'd heard about others bringing their families. And each time I suggested we do something together, there was always a reason to postpone. What would you do if you were me? I asked finally. I'd decide what I wanted my life to be, she said gently. You've spent 30 years living for him. Maybe it's time to live for yourself. That afternoon, I sat in my rocking chair and let my thoughts wander in directions they'd never dared to go. What if my evenings weren't spent embroidering gifts that no one noticed? What if my savings went toward something just for me, instead of waiting for the next emergency? What if my time, my space, my energy could finally belong to me? I thought of the things I'd always postponed. The computer course at the community center, the advanced embroidery classes, the trip to Charleston to visit my sister Maya, who had invited me countless times. I had always declined, worried Ethan might need me. That Friday night, while eating dinner alone, the phone rang. "Hi, Mom," Ethan said, his voice overly careful. "Just checking in. Have you thought about what we talked about?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I think you're right. It's better for everyone to have their own space." He exhaled in relief. "I'm glad you understand. I don't want you to feel unloved. We just want everyone to be comfortable." Comfortable. The word echoed long after the call ended. How strange that their comfort required my silence. Their peace demanded my absence. Over the weekend, I made a quiet decision. I would not plan my life around Ethan anymore. No special meals, no spotless house, no waiting by the phone. I would live my weekend as my own person. And to my surprise, the feeling was freeing. On Sunday, I went to Mass alone for the first time in months. Afterward, I spoke with Beatrice, a kind widow who always asked after Ethan. "And how's the young man?" she said warmly. "He's doing well," I answered with a small smile. "So well, in fact, he hardly needs his mother anymore." She nodded knowingly. "That's how it goes, dear. We raise them thinking we're building lifelong companions, but really, we're raising them to leave us." Her words illuminated a truth I had resisted. The problem wasn't that Ethan had outgrown me. It was that I had never learned how to live without being needed. That afternoon, I began to reclaim my space. I folded the extra dining chairs into storage. I turned the guest room into a sewing studio. I rearranged the living room to make space for my favorite books. I redesigned my kitchen for one person, me. Every small act was a declaration. This house was no longer a waiting room for family visits. It was my home. On Monday, I went further. I enrolled in a computer class. I called Maya and told her I was coming to Charleston next month. I opened a new savings account for myself, money that would no longer be available for family emergencies. Each choice, small on its own, together formed the foundation of something new, a life of my own. For 3 decades, I had been defined by one title, Ethan's mother. Now I was rediscovering the woman beneath it. On Tuesday afternoon, while practicing on my brand new laptop, the first major purchase I'd made for myself in years, the phone rang again. "Mother Pirol, how are you?" Tasha's voice was unusually bright. "My mom's hosting a ladies' lunch this Saturday. Nothing formal, just you, her, my Aunt Rose, and me. We'd love to have you." It was the first time she had called me directly in weeks. Her voice was sweet, practiced. "Will Ethan be there?" I asked. "Oh, no," she replied lightly. "It's just us ladies." I paused for a moment. 3 weeks ago, I would have accepted without hesitation, grateful for any small gesture of family inclusion. But now I could see it clearly for what it was, an act of social obligation, a token invitation meant to check the box of including the mother-in-law, carefully controlled in timing and circumstance. "Tasha, thank you very much for the invitation, but I already have plans for Saturday," I said, surprising myself with how effortlessly the words came out. "Oh well, don't worry. We'll do it another time," she replied, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. She had expected me to accept any crumb of attention offered. After hanging up, I realized I truly did have plans. My first advanced computer class, and a trip to the San Juan market for embroidery supplies. Plans made entirely for my own enjoyment, without considering whether they fit around Ethan or Tasha's schedules. On Wednesday, an unexpected call came from my sister-in-law, Simone, the one who had been particularly distant at the wedding. "Grace, how are you? I'm calling because my son Devin is having his first communion next month, and we wanted to invite you." Another invitation, this time weeks in advance, no doubt after much family debate about whether to include me. "Simone, thank you so much for thinking of me," I said evenly. "Can I confirm next week? I'm organizing my calendar and want to be sure I can attend properly." It was a diplomatic response, giving me space to decide whether I truly wanted to attend another event where I was tolerated more than wanted. By Thursday evening, over a quiet dinner in my newly organized kitchen, a realization dawned on me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't anxious waiting for the phone to ring. I wasn't hoping Ethan would need something, or mentally preparing excuses to cancel my own plans for a family emergency. This new independence hadn't arrived with drama or pain. It had come softly, like peace settling over a long-stormed sea. I still loved Ethan deeply, but the love was no longer mixed with the desperation to prove I was worthy of his attention. Friday morning, while reading a book I'd bought simply because I liked the cover, a small, long-forbidden luxury, the phone rang. It was Ethan. "Mom, Tasha said you can't come to lunch on Saturday. Are you feeling okay?" "No, son, I'm perfectly fine," I replied. "I just have other commitments." "What commitments?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. It seemed he hadn't imagined I could have a life independent of theirs. "I'm taking computer classes and have some things to do for the house," I said casually. "Oh," he answered, the word hanging there as if he were processing this new version of me, one with her own priorities. After hanging up, I thought about how, for years, any family invitation had automatically outranked everything else in my life. Ethan had grown up expecting that unconditional availability as natural. Now, faced with boundaries, he didn't quite know how to respond. That afternoon, while arranging my new embroidery threads in the studio, a text arrived from Tasha. "Mother Pearl, I hope you're not upset about something. If there's a problem, we can talk." It struck me how my simple no had been interpreted as a sign of conflict. My compliance had been so consistent that any deviation was seen as problematic. I replied calmly, "I'm not upset, Tasha. I'm just organizing my time differently." "Thank you for the invitation. No drama, no apology, just quiet ownership of my own life." Saturday became the first day in years I devoted entirely to myself. In the morning, I attended my computer class, surrounded by women my age rediscovering curiosity after decades of family duty. In the afternoon, I strolled through the market, buying vibrant threads and fabrics I'd always admired but never allowed myself to purchase. That evening, as I ate dinner alone, I realized I had spent the entire day thinking mostly of my own plans, my learning, my projects, my pleasure. The feeling was unfamiliar but deeply comforting. On Sunday morning, while watering my plants, my neighbor Delea leaned over the fence. "Hey, honey, doesn't Ethan come on Sundays anymore? I haven't seen him in weeks." It was an innocent question, but it made me realize how my inner changes were beginning to show outwardly. "Well, he's married now," I said with an easy smile. "Everyone has their own life." 3 months ago, I would have rushed to explain his absence, defending him from even imagined criticism. But now, the simple truth felt enough. Delea nodded. "That's life, honey. The children grow up, and we have to learn to live for ourselves again." "How are you doing, though? How are you keeping busy?" It was the first time in a long while someone had asked about me. Not my son, not my family, just me. "Very well," I said, surprised at how true it felt. "I'm learning new things, working on projects I'd put off. I'm really enjoying having time for myself," she smiled warmly. "I'm glad to hear that. You seem very peaceful lately." And for the first time in years, I truly was. That afternoon, as I worked on a complex embroidery design, one I was doing purely because I loved it, not because it was meant for anyone else. I found myself reflecting on how profoundly I had changed in just 2 weeks. The initial sting of realizing my new place in Ethan's life had softened into something more empowering. A quiet determination to build an identity that existed beyond motherhood. For the first time in 30 years, Grace Piol was living for Grace Piol. And contrary to everything I had feared, the world had not collapsed. Ethan and Tasha were perfectly fine without my constant vigilance. The house still stood, even without being perpetually prepared for unannounced family visits. My days now had rhythm and purpose, shaped not by others' needs, but by my own. It felt as though I had been holding my breath for decades, and had finally allowed myself to exhale. The air that filled my lungs was lighter, fresher, entirely mine. The real transformation began 3 weeks after that conversation with Ethan, on a quiet Monday morning, when I decided to do something I had never done in my 67 years. Write a list of everything I wanted to achieve, thinking only of my own happiness, without factoring in Ethan, Tasha, or anyone else. I sat at my sewing table, now transformed into my personal desk, opened a new notebook I'd bought just for this purpose, and began writing freely. I want to learn to use the computer confidently and connect with people my age who share my interests. I want to travel to Charleston to see Maya and stay as long as I wish, without asking if anyone needs me at home. I want to take advanced embroidery classes at the Community Art Center. I want to buy clothes that I genuinely like, not what is merely appropriate for my age. I want to go to the movies alone and never feel the need to explain why I'm unaccompanied. Each line felt like a small act of rebellion, a declaration of independence. For the first time in decades, I was defining desires that had nothing to do with being useful to others, but everything to do with rediscovering who I was when no longer defined by my family role. That very afternoon, I began putting my list into action. Quietly, methodically, I called the Buckhead Art Center and enrolled in an embroidery workshop that started Thursday. I didn't ask for anyone's opinion. I simply signed up, as any independent adult would. Then I went to the mall and bought 3 bright blouses that made me smile the moment I saw them, without worrying if they were too youthful or if Ethan would approve. On Tuesday, I booked a bus ticket to Charleston with an open return. When Maya asked how long I'd stay, I surprised even myself with my answer. I'm not sure. It depends on how good I feel there. It was the first time I had made plans without tying them to someone else's expectations. On Wednesday, I took an even bolder step. I went to the bank and completely reorganized the way I managed my pension. Instead of keeping everything in one account for emergencies, I divided it into 4 categories: household expenses, personal savings, an actual emergency fund, and most importantly, a monthly budget solely for my own pleasures. For the first time in my adult life, part of my income existed purely for my enjoyment. These changes may have looked small from the outside, but to me, they were revolutionary. For 3 decades, I had lived as if my life were communal property, my time, energy, and money perpetually available for others' needs. Now I was reclaiming my autonomy, not defiantly, but with the quiet assurance of someone who finally understands her worth. By Thursday, in my first embroidery class, I met women who would forever change the way I viewed independence. There was Oelia, 72, who began painting professionally after being widowed at 65. Gloria, 69, who learned to drive and now traveled the country on her own. And Alicia, 71, who had gone back to school and just finished her GED. All of them had once lived entirely for their families, and all of them were now discovering the joy of living for themselves. The secret, Oelia said, as we practiced a shading technique, is to stop asking for permission to live your own life. Our children don't need us to survive anymore, but we're still alive, and we have the right to be happy. Her words struck deep. They perfectly expressed what I had been feeling, but hadn't yet dared to say aloud. Gloria added, I spent 40 years waiting to be included in my kids' plans or my husband's. Then I realized I can make my own plans and invite whoever I want. And Alicia concluded softly, We raise our children to believe that mom will always say yes, that she'll always be there, always put them first. Then we act surprised when they believe it. Listening to them was like hearing my own thoughts spoken by wiser voices. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only woman who had mistaken devotion for self-erasure. And more importantly, it wasn't too late to change. So on Friday, empowered by their words, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just 3 weeks earlier. Ethan called, asking if I could watch Simone's kids on Saturday, because she and her husband had plans. It was exactly the kind of favor I had always agreed to, without hesitation, without question, without regard for my own life. Ethan, I said, with a calmness that even surprised me. I won't be able to. I already have plans for Saturday. What plans? Ethan asked, with the same tone of mild surprise he'd used the week before. I'm going to the movies with some friends from my embroidery class. Then we're having dinner together. It was completely true. We had made those plans just the day before. But Mom, Simone really needs someone to watch the kids. She doesn't know anyone else she trusts. That sentence revealed everything. For years, I had been the default solution to every childcare emergency in the family, not because I was the best choice, but because I never said no. I'm sure they'll find another solution, I said calmly. There are plenty of responsible babysitters around, or maybe one of Simone's friends can help. Ethan paused, clearly processing the fact that I wasn't offering alternatives or volunteering to fix the problem myself. Is everything okay, Mom? You've seemed different lately. It was the first time he'd actually said out loud that he'd noticed. I'm doing very well, son, I replied. I'm just learning to organize my time differently. Differently how? By including the things I enjoy, not only the things the family needs. After hanging up, I realized I had crossed an invisible but vital line. For the first time, I'd chosen my own plans over a non-urgent family need. Ethan would have to tell Simone that his mother was no longer automatically available. Simone would have to find her own solutions. It was a small change, but a revolutionary one. That Saturday, I experienced something I hadn't in decades, a full day of adult fun with women my age who shared my interests. We watched a Mexican film about a widow reinventing her life, then had dinner at a restaurant where none of us had to cook, serve, or clean. We talked about our projects, the books we were reading, and the trips we dreamed of taking. It felt like rediscovering a version of myself that had been asleep for years. Grace, the woman, not just Grace, the mother. All night, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no questions about when I'd be home. Ethan and Tasha had managed their weekend without me, exactly as it should be between independent adults. On Sunday morning, I was enjoying breakfast and a book a friend had lent me, Women Who Reinvented Themselves After 60, when the phone rang. It was Tasha, her voice polite but edged with irritation. Mother, Simone said you couldn't watch the children yesterday. I hope it wasn't because you were feeling unwell. No, dear, I was perfectly fine, I said evenly. I just had other plans. Oh. Well, Simone had to cancel her plans with her husband. We thought maybe there was a misunderstanding. It fascinated me how a simple no from me had turned into something that needed explaining. There was no misunderstanding, I said gently. I have a social life and personal plans too. Simone had several days to find a sitter. Tasha was quiet for a moment, caught off guard by my directness. Well, I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Everything's perfectly fine. Tasha, thank you for asking. After hanging up, I realized something profound. My decisions didn't need to be justified or softened with apologies. That afternoon, as I packed for my trip to Charleston, I reflected on how much I'd changed in just 3 weeks. There had been no dramatic showdowns or emotional speeches. I had simply started living like the independent person I had always had the right to be. Early Monday, waiting for the bus, a text from Ethan appeared. Mom, Tasha said you're going on a trip. Why didn't you tell us sooner? When will you be back? It was curious how a week-long visit to my sister seemed to require family approval. I texted back, Son, I'm a 67-year-old adult. I don't need permission to visit my sister. I'll be back when my visit is over. Love you both. It was a message of love, but also of boundaries. I could care deeply for my family, without reporting every movement of my life. During the 4-hour trip to Charleston, I watched the passing fields and reflected on the woman I had been 3 weeks ago versus the woman I was now. The difference wasn't that I loved Ethan any less. It was that I no longer measured my worth through his approval. His happiness still mattered to me, but it was no longer more important than my own. When I arrived, Maya greeted me with open arms. "Sister, I'm so glad you finally came. You look different, relaxed." Her words confirmed what I had only begun to sense. The inner change was visible. That evening, as we sat on her porch, talking about our childhood, our late siblings, and our hopes for the years ahead, I realized something simple yet profound. It had been years since I'd had a conversation that didn't revolve around Ethan. For the first time in decades, I was just Grace, a woman talking with her sister about life. After listening to me describe my embroidery classes and new friends, Maya smiled and said softly, "I always thought you were too devoted to Ethan. It's not wrong to be a good mother, but you completely forgot to be Grace." Her words were gentle, but true. And for the first time, I was ready to hear them. "You're right," I admitted. "But it's never too late to remember who you are, is it?" Maya smiled warmly. "Not at all. In fact, I think a woman's 60s and 70s can be her best years, if she finally gives herself permission to live for herself." That night, as I settled into the guest room in Maya's house, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. For once, I wasn't worrying about whether Ethan needed me for something, whether everything at home was in order, or whether my absence was inconveniencing anyone. I was simply there, in a new place, with my sister, doing something that existed for no other reason than it made me happy. The next 5 days in Charleston were a quiet revelation. Maya took me to the Sweetgrass Basket workshops, where women our age had started new artistic careers after 60. We visited old colonial churches, where I lingered over the intricate antique embroidery without glancing at the time. At the artisan market, I bought fabrics and threads for future projects without once questioning whether the expense was necessary. But what mattered most wasn't what we did. It was what I began to rediscover within myself. I realized I had strong opinions about art, that I loved debating American history, that I enjoyed wandering down unfamiliar streets with no destination, just curiosity. It felt like meeting a woman I used to know, the one I'd been before my identity was consumed by motherhood. On Wednesday, Ethan called, and the conversation revealed just how much my change was unsettling the family dynamic. "Mom, when exactly? Are you coming back?" "Tasha's planning a family dinner this weekend and we need to know if you'll be there." I looked out over the harbor from Maya's porch, the sea breeze lifting my hair. "I'm not sure, sweetheart. I'm very comfortable here with my sister." "What do you mean you're not sure? Didn't you buy a return ticket?" "I bought an open ticket," I said lightly, "so I can come back whenever I feel like it." There was a long pause. Ethan, trying to process a mother who didn't live by fixed plans or family schedules, but by her own desires. "But Mom, Tasha already started planning the dinner. She invited her parents. She really wants you to be there." It struck me how this dinner was being framed as something for me, when in truth, my presence was needed to complete their picture of a harmonious family. "Tell Tasha to go ahead and plan her dinner without counting on me," I said, my tone calm and steady. "If I'm back and free that day, I'll happily join, but she shouldn't base her plans on my availability. I don't have a fixed return date." When I hung up, Maya was watching me with a proud smile. "That's my sister," she said. "About time you reminded them that you have a life of your own." Her words confirmed what I already knew. I was finally learning emotional independence. On Friday, I decided to stay another week, not for any particular reason, but simply because I wanted to. I called Ethan. "Son, I'm extending my stay. Maya's taking me to see Savannah and a few nearby towns." "Another week, Mom?" "You've already been there almost a week," he said, with a tone caught between surprise and mild irritation. "Yes," I said gently. And I'm going to stay another week because I'm enjoying it. My house will still be there when I get back. And so will my things. It was the first time in my adult life I had made a decision entirely based on what I wanted, without worrying how others might react or whether it met their expectations. The feeling was both terrifying and liberating, like learning to walk again after years of relying on emotional crutches. That night, as Maya and I planned our day trip to Savannah, a message from Tasha appeared on my phone. "Mother, we understand you want to enjoy your trip, but Ethan is worried. You've never been away from home this long. We just want to make sure you're okay." I smiled and typed back, "Tasha, I'm perfectly fine. I'm on vacation with my sister, something I should have done years ago. Ethan doesn't need to worry about an adult woman visiting her family in another state." And as I hit send, I felt it clearly. I had finally stepped into my own life. It was a message that made one thing perfectly clear. My well-being no longer required constant family supervision. At the end of my second week in Charleston, as I packed my suitcase to return home, because I had decided it was time, not because anyone had asked me to, I reflected on the quiet transformation that had unfolded. It hadn't been a dramatic revolution filled with arguments or tears, but rather a calm, deliberate evolution toward emotional independence. During the ride back to Atlanta, I watched my reflection in the bus window and saw a woman both familiar and new. The same grace, yes, but there was something different in her eyes, a serenity that came from knowing her worth, separate from her role as a mother. When I arrived at my little house on the south side that afternoon, I found several messages from Ethan, asking what time I would arrive, if I needed a ride, if everything was all right. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to call immediately and reassure everyone I was safe. Instead, I ran a warm bath, unpacked at my own pace, and made myself a simple dinner. Only when I felt rested and settled did I pick up the phone. "Son, I'm home. Everything went great. I'll tell you all about it tomorrow." "Mom, we were worried," Ethan said. "Why didn't you call as soon as you got in?" "Ethan," I replied gently, "I'm a responsible adult. I don't have to report every movement of my life. See you soon." That night, in a home now arranged for my comfort, I went to bed with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had accomplished something difficult, transforming a toxic pattern without confrontation or resentment. I had reclaimed my autonomy simply by living it, one decision at a time. The biggest change wasn't in Ethan or Tasha's behavior, though that too began to shift. The real transformation was in how I saw myself. I no longer needed their approval to validate my existence. I no longer measured my worth by how useful I was to them. I no longer waited to be invited into their lives. Now, I had a life of my own, full, peaceful, and self-directed, and they were welcome to be part of it, as long as respect and mutual affection guided the relationship. 2 months later, while I was working on a delicate embroidery project in my studio, the phone rang. It was Ethan. "Mom, do you have plans for Sunday? Tasha and I want to do something special with you." "What kind of something special?" I asked, curious. "We want to take you to visit an artist's studio. He specializes in traditional African-American textile art, and we thought you'd really enjoy it." It was an invitation centered on my interests, not a request for help or a family obligation. "I love the idea," I said. "What time will you pick me up? Does 10 in the morning work?" "Perfect. I'll be waiting." It was such a simple exchange, yet deeply meaningful, an invitation to share something, not to serve a purpose. That Sunday, as we walked through the artist's studio, I explained embroidery techniques I recognized from years of practice. Ethan and Tasha listened with genuine interest, watching as I spoke with the artist, a man named Arturo, who asked detailed questions about traditional stitching methods. To my quiet joy, I could answer each one with precision. I saw something in my son's and daughter-in-law's eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Respect. Real, unfiltered respect. On the drive home, Tasha said, "I didn't know you knew so much about textile history." "It never occurred to me to ask," Ethan added. "It's incredible how you can identify the origin of a piece just by its pattern. Their words made me realize how much I had carried within me. Knowledge, stories, insights that had gone unnoticed. Not because I lacked a voice, but because there had never been space for me to use it. Now finally there was. That afternoon, after they dropped me off at home, I settled into my favorite rocking chair and let my thoughts drift back over the path I had traveled since that wedding night. The night I overheard Tasha celebrating my absence. The woman who had been wounded by those words no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood her own worth, who had built a rich, independent life, and who had taught her family to treat her with respect, not out of pity or duty, but out of genuine recognition of who she was. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Gloria, my friend from the embroidery workshop. "Grace, what are your plans for tomorrow?" "Oilia wants us to go with her to see a folk art exhibition at the Fulton County Arts Center." "I love that idea," I said without hesitation. "What time should we meet?" As we chatted about our plans, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. My social life no longer revolved around Ethan and Tasha. I had my own projects, my own circle of friends who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I was no longer a woman on the fringes of her son's life. I was a woman with a full, vibrant life of her own. One that welcomed her family when respect flowed both ways. The greatest lesson wasn't that I had stopped loving Ethan or distanced myself from my family. It was that I had finally learned to love myself with the same intensity I had once reserved for others. That self-love had transformed every relationship I had, making them more authentic, more balanced, and paradoxically, more loving. That night, as I laid out my clothes for the next day, a cultural outing with my friends followed by a dinner with Ethan and Tasha, planned a week in advance, I smiled. I thought of the woman I once was and the woman I had become. Both had loved deeply, but only one had learned that true love begins within and extends outward, not from emptiness seeking approval, but from fullness seeking connection. 6 months had passed since that transformative conversation with Ethan and Tasha. As I watered the geraniums in the garden, I had redesigned entirely to my taste. I reflected on the peace I now felt. It was a perfect October morning in Southside Atlanta, bathed in golden light that made everything seem possible. For the first time in decades, I was completely at ease with the direction of my life. My mornings had taken on a rhythm I never would have imagined at 67. I rose at 6:30, not because anyone needed me, but because I cherished the quiet hours when my mind felt clearest. I brewed coffee in my new coffee maker, an indulgence I'd allowed myself, and sat on the porch surrounded by plants, rocking gently as I simply existed without agenda. I watched the light shift through the leaves, listened to the neighborhood waking, and allowed my thoughts to wander freely. It was a luxury I hadn't known in 30 years. The luxury of being present without structuring every moment around someone else's needs. After coffee, I moved to my sewing studio, my sanctuary. The walls displayed my favorite embroidery pieces, not as gifts for others, but as a celebration of my craft. A large table allowed me to spread out my projects without needing to clear them for family activities. Everything in that room reflected my comfort, my rhythm, my creativity. That morning, I worked on a tapestry of my own design, large, colorful, and inspired by traditional African motifs interpreted through my personal vision. It would take months to complete, but that was part of its beauty. It existed for no one's approval, no deadline, no purpose beyond my own joy. As I embroidered, my mind often returned to the quiet transformation within me, not just in my relationships with Ethan and Tasha, but in the one I'd finally built with myself. The anxious, self-effacing woman who once absorbed every slight was gone. In her place stood a woman who set boundaries without guilt, who honored her own talents and passions, and who had learned to replace worry with calm. For years, my mind had been filled with a constant hum of concern for Ethan. Had he eaten? Was he upset? Did he still need me? That noise was gone now. In its place was a serene kind of love, one that cared deeply without needing control. At 10, as I had done for the past 3 months, I laced up my shoes for my daily walk through the trails of the Southside Greenway Park. It had begun as a doctor's recommendation, but it had become one of my most cherished rituals, a time to move, to breathe, to greet neighbors, and to savor the simple joy of being alive and fully myself. On one of the park benches, I met Beatrice, a 73-year-old widow in the midst of rediscovering who she was apart from her long-held family roles. "Good morning, Grace," she said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How are you?" "Very well, Beatrice. And how are things going at home?" I asked gently. I already knew her children were urging her to sell the house she'd lived in for 40 years and move to a smaller apartment. "Well, we're managing," she sighed. "My children keep saying the house is too big for me, that it's too much to handle alone. But that house holds all my history. I don't know if I'm ready to leave it." Her words stirred a familiar ache in me, reminding me of my own struggle to separate what I truly wanted from what others thought I should want. "Beatrice," I said, sitting beside her on the bench, "what do you want to do? Not what your children think is best or what others say is practical. What does your heart want?" She looked at me in surprise, as if no one had ever asked her that question before. "Honestly," she admitted softly, "I'd like to stay. I love my garden. I know all my neighbors. I've built my routine here. But my children think I'm being stubborn, that I just can't accept that life has to change." It was a story I knew too well. Adult children mistaking control for care. "And can you afford to keep the house? Do you feel safe living alone?" I asked, focusing on what truly mattered. "Yes, to both," she said quickly. "My pension is enough. The house is paid for, and I feel perfectly safe. It's just that they think a woman my age shouldn't live alone in a big house." I smiled at her. "Beatrice, you're a capable adult who has every right to make your own choices, as long as you can do so safely. If you want to stay in your home, that's your decision, not your children's." She studied my face, searching for reassurance. "Do you really think it's all right to tell them no?" "I think it's all right for you to live your life according to your own wishes," I replied. Sometimes children forget that their mothers are still individuals, independent people with the right to make choices, even when those choices aren't the ones they'd make. We talked for another 20 minutes, and when we finally stood to say goodbye, I saw something shift in her expression, a quiet determination, as though she had just remembered her own strength. That conversation stayed with me. It made me realize how many women of my generation were still struggling with those same family dynamics. My own journey had unexpectedly turned me into a kind of quiet example, a living reminder that it was possible to claim one's independence without losing love. When I returned home, I found a message on my answering machine from my sister, Maya in Charleston. "Grace, just calling to say hello. My neighbor Rosario is going through something similar to what you faced with Ethan. I told her about your story, and she wants to know if she can call you. She says she needs to hear from someone who managed to change that relationship without losing her family." It struck me how my personal experience had become a source of guidance for others. Over the past few months, I'd received several calls. From Maya's friends, from women in my embroidery class, even from neighbors, asking for advice on setting healthy boundaries with their grown children. I called Maya back right away. "Of course Rosario can call me," I said. "I'd be happy to talk to her. If I can help other women find that balance, I'd consider it a privilege." "Oh, Grace," Maya said warmly, "you have no idea how much you've changed. You sound like a completely different person, more confident, more at peace. It's like you finally found your place in the world." Her words touched me deeply, because she was right. I had found my place in the world, not as a shadow in Ethan's life, but as Grace Perrell, a whole woman with her own passions, friendships, and purpose. That afternoon, I went to my advanced embroidery class at the Art Center. I'd improved so much that Carmen, the instructor, coincidentally sharing a name with my daughter-in-law, though with an entirely different personality, had asked me to help teach some of the newer students. It was the first time in years that someone had recognized my expertise and treated my knowledge as something worth sharing. I worked with Norma, a 45-year-old woman who had taken up embroidery after a difficult divorce. "Grace," she said as I demonstrated a tricky stitch, "you're such a patient teacher. You can tell you really enjoy helping others learn." Her words warmed me. She was right, I did enjoy it. Teaching came naturally to me, and watching others grow brought me real joy. As I was showing Norma a new technique, Carmen approached. "Grace, I've been thinking," she said. "Would you be interested in teaching a Saturday morning workshop on traditional American folk embroidery? We've had a lot of requests, and you'd be perfect for it. Experienced, calm, patient." The idea thrilled me. Turning my passion into something that could help others, and being recognized for it, felt like the perfect next step. "I'd love to," I said at once. "When would we start?" "In 2 weeks, if that works for you," she replied. "It'll be a 6-session course, and of course, we'll pay you for your time." It was the first time anyone had ever offered to pay me for something I truly loved doing, not out of obligation, but as recognition of my worth. That evening, as I ate dinner in my cozy, reorganized kitchen, I thought about the new workshop with quiet excitement. Then the phone rang. It was Ethan. "Hi, Mom," he said. "How are you? Am I interrupting anything?" The way he asked made me smile. He had changed too. He now recognized that my time might be occupied, that I had my own life. "You're not interrupting, son. I just finished dinner. How are you and Tasha?" "We're great, Mom. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Tasha wants to invite you to dinner on Friday. It's our 6-month anniversary, and we'd love for you to celebrate with us." It was exactly the kind of invitation that had become the norm. Planned ahead, offered with intention, my presence seen as wanted rather than assumed. "That's lovely, son. I'd be delighted. What time?" 7. "We're trying a new place, modern Southern cuisine. We think you'll love it." Their thoughtfulness made me smile. They'd chosen a restaurant with my tastes in mind. "Perfect," I said. "I'll be there." "Mom," Ethan said, his voice filled with genuine affection. "Tasha and I were just talking about how proud we are of you. Your classes, your projects, your new friends. You seem so happy lately." His words moved me more than he could have known. For the first time, he was seeing me not just as his mother, but as a person with her own world and growth. "Thank you, son," I replied softly. "I truly am happy. I've discovered parts of myself I didn't even know existed. And it shows," he said warmly. "Tasha always says how interesting it is to talk with you now. How our conversations are about your projects, and not just about us." It was a perceptive observation, one that confirmed what I already felt deep inside. The dynamic of our family had changed. After hanging up, I sat quietly in my freshly organized living room, letting a wave of gratitude wash over me. The woman who had once been wounded by Tasha's careless wedding remark had transformed that pain into something powerful. A journey that healed, not only herself but her relationships too. That transformation became clear at our Friday night anniversary dinner. For the first time in years, I spent an entire evening with Ethan and Tasha, where I felt seen, heard and valued, not as a caretaker, but as a whole, independent woman. We talked about the new workshop I was going to teach, the books I was reading, and my plans to visit Charleston again, maybe even explore more southern cities. Tasha asked detailed questions about my embroidery techniques, not out of politeness, but genuine curiosity. Ethan even asked for my opinion on decorating a wall in their condo, something he used to dismiss as old-fashioned. It was as if they had finally discovered that their mother had a personality, knowledge and insights of her own. During dessert, Tasha surprised me. "Mother Parcel," she said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking a lot about my relationship with my own mom. I realized I've been making the same mistakes we once made with you, taking her for granted, assuming she'll always be there, never asking about her interests." Her words touched me deeply. My personal evolution had rippled outward, awakening empathy in those around me. Ethan nodded. "I've thought about that too. It's so easy to see our mothers only as mothers, not as complete women with their own lives. I think a lot of us make that mistake." His sincerity filled me with quiet hope. When the evening ended, Ethan walked me to my car. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He asked, "Mom, are you happy with all the changes you've made in your life?" It wasn't a question about my health or what I was doing for others. It was about me. "Very happy," I replied truthfully. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my life, not just existing to meet everyone else's needs. He looked at me tenderly. I'm so glad to hear that. And I'm sorry it took me so long to realize you deserve that. His words felt like a balm over old wounds. Gentle, healing and freeing. Ethan, I said, taking his hand. What matters isn't how long it took us to learn. What matters is that we did. Now we can build something new. Something based on respect and love. Not guilt or dependency. Later that night, I sat on my porch beneath the stars, reflecting on the long road that had brought me here, from feeling invisible and undervalued to reclaiming my autonomy, and finally to nurturing healthier, more authentic relationships. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful, filled with purpose. It was the silence of someone who had learned to value herself without needing external approval, who had turned pain into wisdom and invisibility into strength. I thought of all the women like Beatrice, like Rosario and Charleston, like my future students, each on her own journey toward emotional independence. My story was no longer just mine. It had become proof that it's never too late to rediscover who you are, once you stop defining yourself by what you do for others. That night, under the soft glow of the stars, I understood something deeply. Real love, especially family love, thrives only when rooted in respect and individuality, not dependence or sacrifice. Ethan and Tasha loved me more genuinely now that they saw me as an independent woman. And I loved them more freely now that I no longer needed their approval to feel worthy. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give those we love is to teach them how to love us rightly, as whole, valuable, independent people. And sometimes, the truest act of self-love is simply granting ourselves permission to be, without apology, without justification, and without measuring our worth through how much we serve others.